Happy Thanksgiving month, everybody, and Tony here with my review of the second Lord of the Rings movie, The Two Towers, which I saw a couple of weeks ago at the Cinesta Kubix am Alexanderplatz, and which had its premiere back on December 5, 2002 at New York's Ziegfeld Theater, and had its overall American premiere 13 days later of that same year, and also had its New Zealand premiere on December 19, 2002. This was directed, written, and produced by Peter Jackson. It was based on J.R.R. Tolkien's The Two Towers. It was co-written by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Stephen Sinclair. It was co-produced by Barry M. Osborne and Fran Walsh. The cinematographer was Andrew Lesney. The editor was Michael J. Horton. The music was composed by Howard Shore, and it starred the talents of Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Andy Serkis, Ian McKellen, Christopher Lee, Viggo Mortensen, John-Rhys Davies, Orlando Bloom, David Wenham, Sean Bean, John Noble, Billy Boyd, Dominic Monaghan, Hugo Weaving, Liv Tyler, Kate Blanchett, Craig Parker, John Lee, Bernard Hill, Brad Dourif, Miranda Otto, Carl Urban, Bruce Hopkins, John Bach, and Nathaniel Lees. A few observations I've noticed about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, especially when it comes to its direct predecessor, the Ring of the Nibelungs, or the Nibelung Saga. I've noticed that the stories involved have the main element of the all-powerful ring. One ring that is so coveted by various mystical creatures, but is also the source of greed, selfishness, and the ultimate avarice that can corrupt even the purest of souls. And that's something I've also noticed about the Lord of the Rings trilogy films, as well as the original source material written by J.R.R. Tolkien, as well as the Norse myths revolving around the Ring of the Nibelungs, as well as Richard Wagner's operatic tetralogy, Der Ring der Nibelungen. As I grew up, I have come to appreciate the Lord of the Rings trilogy a lot more, and The Two Towers was certainly no exception. Starting off with the story, it takes off where the first Lord of the Rings film, The Fellowship of the Ring, left off. And there is a lot more at stake. There are a lot more characters finding themselves in life or death situations, and the situations that they've been getting themselves into have a lot more tension, action, and a lot more personal drama, ranging from Frodo slowly being consumed by the ring's power and still grappling with how much his burden is weighing up against him, even with Sam trying to stay by his side as his confidant, brother from another mother, and best friend for life. The war going on between Rohan and the orcs, as well as the alliance formed with the elves and all the benevolent creatures of Middle-earth, and the drama that constantly increases, both politically and personally, especially when the ring is involved. While there's a lot more bombastic action, especially with all of the elven warriors and even some of the human warriors and dwarf warriors doing battle against the orcs, the story also takes time to find a little bit of respite, such as with Pippin's and Merry's interactions with the tree giant, or Ent, Treebeard, with all of the stories that Treebeard tells them, especially when he initially mistook both Pippin and Merry as invaders or intruders, and once he finds out that they don't mean him any harm, he still has a watchful eye over them and still manages to tell his stories of how life was like with all the Ents and their encounter with Saruman before finding out that Saruman has done a lot of terrible things. Interspersing with the calmer moments between Pippin, Merry, and Treebeard is the personal drama weighing on Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, who was also once upon a time known as Smeagol. Frodo is still grappling with his responsibilities as the ring bearer, as well as how much power has consumed him, despite trying to maintain his good-natured self. Sam also realizes that the ring has been taking a toll on Frodo to the point where he is scared of losing him. And as for Gollum, or Smeagol, he contributes a lot more to the story and will also contribute his fair share in the subsequent film. So there is a lot more at stake occurring in the Two Towers, not just in terms of all the action buildup, especially when it comes to all the warring kingdoms battling against the orcs to ensure that peace is restored, but also the personal drama surrounding Frodo and the growing power that he feels from that all-powerful ring, and Sam's fear of losing his very good friend and confidant, and Gollum coveting his precious ring, but Smeagol trying to find newfound trust with Frodo and Sam, and of course the quieter moments occurring between Pippin, Merry, and Treebeard. Everything has a lot of tension, action, thrills, and interest, and also balance that made this particular film, let alone the continuation of the Fellowship of the Ring, an absolutely excellent one. I do have a couple of favorite scenes. One of them is Gandalf's return, going from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, especially after his battle with the terrifying demon known as Barlog, and he returns a lot more powerful and a lot more determined to help his allies restore peace throughout Middle-earth. This newfound power that Gandalf has also enables him to cure King Theoden of Rohan from his ailments and rapid old aging caused by none other than Saruman. The possessed King Theoden claims that Gandalf does not have any power in his kingdom, but Gandalf, like the legendarily awesome wizard mentor figure that he is, proves him wrong, and in his glory shines his white light upon King Theoden, expels Saruman out of him, and King Theoden becomes a lot more rejuvenated, and all of his ailments are immediately healed. That moment kind of reminds me of Parsifal healing Amfortas from his wounds. And here in this moment, Gandalf is not only Gurnemans to a lot of his young charges Parsifals, let alone their squires or knights of the Grail, but he's also Parsifal in this moment in which he uses his staff to heal King Theoden the Amfortas in this scenario of his wounds, as well as revive him and redeem him from that particular ailment. And in this moment, Saruman is the Klingzor of this scene. So it's not just the Ring of the Nibelungs that the Lord of the Rings references, but also other Wagnerian operas like Lohengrin, Parsifal, Tristan und Isolde, and if you're looking at Shakespeare, it also has a little bit of Macbeth and Richard III, and to some extent Hamlet, but mostly Macbeth in terms of the political gain. So there is just so much going on in the Two Towers to the point where I was at the edge of my seat every time my eyes were glued to the screen. The cinematography continued to be excellent, and it's not just the locations found in New Zealand that were absolutely gorgeous to marvel and look at, but also a good chunk of the camera shots. One notable example is Gollum's and Smeagol's dialogue with each other. Though they are the same person embodied in one, they're also different characteristics that put these two in an everlasting conflict with each other. Just as Frodo and Sam are sleeping from their journey to Mordor, Gollum and Smeagol have a bit of a dialogue with each other of what to do with Frodo and Sam. Gollum says that he wants to kill both of them and take the ring for himself, but Smeagol is extremely hesitant and doesn't want anything to do with murder. Gollum, on the other hand, reminds him that he is absolutely lonely and doesn't have any friends and is nothing more than a criminal and a murderer. And the way Gollum utters murderer makes us, the viewers, not only intimidated, but also illustrates how much power Gollum's personality has over Smeagol, and shows that the ring has essentially corrupted Smeagol into becoming nothing more than a shadow of what he could have been, and gave in to the ring's dark power, with Gollum manifesting it. This culminates with Smeagol not wanting anything to do with his Gollum side and fighting back for him to depart, not only from his body, but also from his life and mind forever. After that dialogue is done, Smeagol ends up jubilating for joy. And that is just how masterful the use of cinematography is in that particular moment between Smeagol and Gollum conversing with each other of not only their plans, but also of Smeagol's terrible, terrible past. It also illustrates that it's not just the majestic scenery, let alone all of that majesty, pomp, action, and gorgeousness that we see in the forest scenes, or those castles, or those mountains, or all of that nature being used to make Middle-earth, Mordor, and all the locales of the Lord of the Rings trilogy absolutely excellent, but also those intimate moments that can be brought into light to show that there are characters faced with all of these conflicts and all of these challenges that they either overcome or succumb to without any sort of hope for them, let alone if there's even a slim chance of hope for any character involved. On top of that, the effects were also masterfully done, thus showing a whole lot of vivacity from Gollum's grotesque movements to the orcs' intimidating and scary presence. Therefore, the cinematography, whether they be in the grand scales of the nature shots, or all those war scenes, or the more intimate moments with certain characters grappling with themselves, or the effects found in Gollum, the orcs, and even the Ents, everything is not only masterfully done, but outstanding all the way through. The music is just as gorgeous, riveting, and exciting as always. Leave it up to Howard Shore to compose such an excellent score. One of my favorite pieces of music is when Éowyn sings her funeral song to her cousin, who is also King Theoden's son. And the lyrics that she sings are Old English, thus making it the basis of the language spoken in Middle-earth. The way Éowyn makes her mezzo-soprano voice soar, that E minor key being used to such an amazing effect to emit the sorrow and the passion and the desperation that she has in losing her cousin, was just absolutely riveting. It managed to make me, as the listener, well up with tears when Éowyn's voice poured out of her mouth to mourn for her cousin. And this was not only a beautiful moment of emotional intimacy, but also how masterfully done her a cappella singing was when it came to saying farewell to one of the people she considers to be family and one of the people that she considers to be close to. Yes, she has her uncle Theoden and her younger brother Eomer, but the familial love she has for Theoden's son can never, ever be quenched. Therefore, the music composed by Howard Shore is thoroughly brilliant, excellent, and it also shows just how much I was thoroughly involved with the drama, the tension, and the personal action that the characters have found themselves in. The characters are just as strong as they've always been. Frodo continues to grapple with his quest to not only destroy the ring, but also overcome its influence on him. But gradually, then suddenly, he continues to find himself under its grasp and pull to the point where he almost loses himself and nearly ends up taking Sam's life away from him. But he ends up also scared that this power might end up consuming him. So he still continues to have that conflict within himself that he must overcome, or else he's going to be lost forever. Sam continues to be a faithful friend / brother from another mother. He tries to ensure that Frodo does not end up losing his way. He tries to ensure that Frodo remains well protected and safe. And he also has several trust issues with their new comrade, Gollum, or Smeagol, in which he doesn't really find him to be all of that approachable, considering that Gollum or Smeagol might want the precious ring. So Sam continues to be just as valiant and noble, not only as a great friend to Frodo, but also ensures that his well-being is well protected as well as guarded from all danger. This time we get introduced to Gollum, or Smeagol in the flesh. He is a misshapen creature who is so obsessed with wanting to get his ring back. As Gollum, he is spiteful, venomous, acidic, and acerbic, to the point where he so badly wants to murder Frodo and Sam so that he can finally wrest the ring back to him. Smeagol, on the other hand, is the more innocent, childlike of his personality, because he was once a more innocent hobbit until the ring took him over and consumed him, thus causing him to be overcome by Gollum's terrible and malicious influence. Smeagol / Gollum finds himself serving under Frodo and Sam because Frodo bears the ring and also serves as Frodo's and Sam's guide to Mordor, although Gollum's ambition and desire for the ring is a lot stronger than Smeagol thinks, even if he tries to battle against that terrible side of him. Therefore, there is that personal conflict between Gollum and Smeagol, tug-of-warring against each other and trying to see which one will end up alive and which one will end up disappearing for the rest of their lives. As I mentioned before, Gandalf has grown in power, but also in a lot more formidability. The fact that he emerged from his battle against Barlog with a lot more power and a lot more formidability is also reminiscent of Siegfried's battle against Fafnir the dragon, with Gandalf being the Siegfried / Wotan against Barlog's Fafnir. He finds himself triumphing against this demonic creature and has attained new powers to the point where he ends up restoring himself as the group's leader and mentor, and also continues to be the wise decision maker of the group. Aragorn is still the formidable warrior he was in the Fellowship of the Ring, but this time there's a part of him that is a little bit more lovelorn because of his separation with Arwen. He has to constantly wrestle with himself in terms of his mortality versus his immortality, but also trying to make sure that he is forever faithful to Arwen, even if she is to lose her life. On top of that, Aragorn's path in this film has been a lot clearer than just being the rogue ranger that he used to be, thus showing that he has found strength with the people that he aligns himself with, as well as really finding his true destiny throughout not only this film, but also the next film. Gimli is still a lovable rogue of a ruffian that I've always admired and that I've always enjoyed watching. I just enjoy how head-on he is when it comes to fighting against the orcs, and how much he has all this charisma to make himself a thoroughly lovable character. Thus, Gimli continues to win in my eyes, and I also like his competitive uncle and nephew banter with Legolas. It's the absolutely great stuff of legends. Legolas, speaking of him, is a lot more charismatic and a lot more vivacious, but in subtle hints, especially with his little competition with Gimli of how many of their orc enemies can they slaughter in battle. Thus, Legolas continues to be as charming and charismatic as ever, which makes him thoroughly engaging to watch on screen, not just in terms of his amazing archery skills, but also his clever banter with Gimli, as well as his comradeship / friendship / brotherhood with Aragorn. On the surface, Faramir is a determined yet somewhat ruthless warrior who desires his fair share of power and conquest. However, there is another side to him that makes him a little bit more interesting than what viewers are meant to believe in. He carries the burden of being the unfavored son of Denethor, in stark comparison to his older brother Boromir being the favorite son. Thus, his motivation of wanting to be just as strong and formidable as his older brother is a lot more understandable. But piece by piece, he becomes a little bit more sympathetic in the later parts of the film to diverge from his initially crusty side. Boromir in the flashback is perceived as this formidable, mighty warrior prince who can rally up armies and lead them to victory, much to Faramir's envy, despite him admiring his older brother, as well as having a close fraternal relationship with him. King Denethor might present himself to be a noble king who wants the best for his people and wants his land to be well protected, but at the same time, he constantly plays favorites between his two sons, thus preferring Boromir's large and in charge might and expertise in battle as opposed to the potential that Faramir could have had. What I found out about Denethor in the film is that his characterization in the film was a lot more exaggerated than his original book counterpart, in which the book portrays him to be a lot more conscientious and wise, whereas the film version, he is a lot more impulsive and kind of doesn't play fair with both of his sons, thus making him not an ideal father figure for both of them and doesn't really treat his sons fairly. Pippin and Merry might have found themselves escaping from being the orcs' hostages, but they also find themselves to be Treebeard's and the Ents' captives because of the suspicion that they might end up being invaders. Now, you might think that Pippin and Merry might no longer be important to the story. However, I could defend their scenes with Treebeard as the necessary breather that is needed from all the personal drama occurring with Frodo and the overall political drama that Faramir, Boromir, and Denethor had as a family, and the huge war occurring against the orcs. At least Pippin and Merry contribute handsomely to the overall story, but I dare not reveal too much of how they contribute, but it's safe to say that they also contribute their fair share and contribute extremely handsomely in terms of the overall story's unraveling. Elrond continues to be the wise and stern elfin king who only wants to ensure that his people are safe from all harm and disaster, as well as protect Arwen from making mistakes that could otherwise alter the course of her life. And he also serves as a receiver of Galadriel's message and prophecy of what will happen with the war and the ring as a whole. Speaking of Galadriel, in this movie, she acts more like a seeress who sees into the future of everything that will unfold, and also conveys those messages to Elrond that the world might come to something a lot more chaotic if he doesn't do anything about it, let alone set an alliance with Rohan. Arwen may not have a lot to do in this film, but she serves as the uncertainty Aragorn is feeling in terms of losing his romantic connection with her, as well as the deep and profound bond that they have shared, not only as lovers, but also as eternal soulmates. And she also fears that this premonition of no longer seeing Aragorn will not only existentially cripple her, but also mean that their uncertainty could be their undoing if nothing is done to resolve this problem. As I mentioned previously, King Theoden starts off as a sickly, old-looking man before Gandalf heals him from his ailments and Saruman's influence, thus restoring him to youth and vivacity and vigor, to the powerful, take charge, and valiant king that he is. He proves himself to be formidable on the battlefield, but also proves himself to be formidable in terms of trying to maintain a family, not just with his son, but also with his niece and nephew, Eowyn and Eomer, respectively. Thus, King Theoden is formidable in terms of maintaining his family, as well as ensuring the safety and well-being of his people. Grima Wormtongue is what would happen if Friedrich von Telramund and Ortrud made a lot of love together and produced their heir. You would get Grima Wormtongue. He is quite a sly, power-hungry, sneaky, and acidic bastard who tries to manipulate King Theoden to have him acquire the throne, as well as acquire Eowyn's hand in marriage. It's fascinating seeing this acidic and slimy and sleazy side of him, as well as that ambitious and calculating personality that he has to want to acquire the throne by his own means, and also being under Saruman's service to ensure that his goals are fully realized. You might think that Eowyn starts off akin to Elisabeth's nobility from Tannhäuser, Elsa's sweetness from Lohengrin, Eva's loveliness from the Meistersinger von Nuremberg, especially since Eva is also the daughter of a goldsmith and also has a sort of mentor figure and someone she kind of fancies in Hans Sachs. Thus, viewers would assume her to be nothing more than this pleasant princess who constantly plays nice with the nobles and is totally loving toward her uncle. However, there is another side to Eowyn, and she is a woman who wants to fight, a woman who is well-versed with weapons, as well as a woman who constantly cares for the people's needs, thus making her a combination of the young Brunhilde's formidability and warrior expertise during her tenure as a Valkyrie, Sieglinde's selflessness when she tries to nurse the people who are wounded back to health, and Isolde's passion when she finds herself locking eyes with Aragorn. And Eowyn's perseverance, ambition, and determination make her an absolutely welcome figure, let alone an absolutely welcome character to this film, and makes her a thoroughly welcome presence all the way through. Eomer is the dutiful brother who does his part in fighting against the enemies to ensure that Rohan is well protected. He also notices that something is fishy with Grima and doesn't even trust him, let alone have him be entrusted to his older sister. So he does have a lot of people smarts and not just warrior skills. Haldir, Hama, Gamling, and Madrial do their parts of being reliable allies, especially when it comes to their battle against the orcs, and also ensure that their respective rulers are well protected. Ugluk is a threatening warrior and leader of the orcs, thus making sure that nobody messes with him. And Treebeard emits both formidable strength as well as that inner cuddliness that he has, especially with his growing relationship with Pippin and Merry. Therefore, the characters are extremely interesting, distinctive, and thoroughly awesome to witness. Whether they be the heroes or the anti-heroes or the villains, everybody managed to play their part as strongly as possible and do so with distinction, interest, and a whole lot of excitement. The acting is just as consistently amazing. Elijah Wood has consistently grown stronger in his role as Frodo, thus showing the inner conflict that he has with his duties as a ring bearer, as well as with dealing with the inevitable corruption that he might end up succumbing to, but also never losing sight of his innocence that makes him wholesome as a hero. Sean Astin also continues to grow stronger in his role as Sam, thus proving himself to be just as much of a hero as Frodo is, let alone prove himself to be just as strong of a thespian as Elijah Wood is, thus making him just as engaging and thoroughly worth rooting for as an actor. It's no surprise that Gollum or Smeagol is one of Andy Serkis's most famous roles of all time. His body work in the choreography that he gave Smeagol or Gollum, and those grotesque yet fluid moves that he makes to bring in shape and form to Gollum/Smeagol, as well as that change of tone that Mr. Serkis has committed himself to in making Gollum sound childlike and innocent and naive, and Gollum acidic, acerbic, and thoroughly malicious. The juxtaposition that Andy Serkis masters with Gollum and Smeagol was just so masterful that I was thoroughly astounded with what he was able to accomplish as a performer. Ian McKellen was just as valiant and just as strong as Gandalf, thus emitting that wise mentor warrior figure that made him all the more lovable and all the more worth rooting for as not only a mentor figure, but also as a complete warrior. Christopher Lee was menacing as always as Saruman, using his trademark bass baritone voice to make him all the more intimidating, as well as all the more frightening to watch. Also to the point of some continuous nervousness that I've had by watching Christopher Lee totally rock it as Saruman. Viggo Mortensen continues to be darkly charismatic and thoroughly determined and handsome as Aragorn. He definitely knew how to play virile nobility and noble elegance to his absolutely great advantage, and he also made it his strong point to make Aragorn a hero worth rooting for, who might have started off as anti-heroic, but once he slowly finds his path and his way, he becomes a lot more heroic. He finds genuinely strong connections, especially with Gimli and Legolas, and does so with elan and brilliance and a whole lot of charisma. John-Rhys Davies continues to steal the show as Gimli, making his lovable roguish nature a welcome treat and the source of a whole lot of smiles and laughter. There's no doubt that Orlando Bloom's dashing elegance was a great asset that made Legolas work so handsomely and so endearingly, whether it be in his more noble and more composed moments or his friendly banters with Gimli. They were brilliant all the way through, and it was also thanks to Orlando Bloom's handsome charisma and total charm. David Wenham managed to make me understand Faramir's inner conflict of not only wanting more power to please his father, who constantly plays favorites with Boromir, but also makes me see that underneath that crusty nature is a young man wanting to find himself and find his own place in life and not just constantly live under Boromir's shadow. Sean Bean in the flashback has a lot more charisma and a lot more virile charm that made him all the more engaging to watch. John Noble was a thoroughly engaging Denethor in which I was able to understand him as the source of the tension that Faramir has with Boromir, but more of the subtle tension, as well as the source of Faramir feeling like he couldn't even measure up to Boromir, thus making his portrayal of King Denethor absolutely engaging. Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan are still lovable as Pippin and Merry, and also worth mentioning is John-Rhys Davies being the voice of Treebeard, in which he was able to use his bass baritone voice to make this tree giant a thoroughly imposing, strong, but also protective figure that made him all the more lovable from beginning to end. Hugo Weaving continued to be nobly elegant and handsome as Elrond, as was Liv Tyler, showing a lot more fragility in Arwen, thus making me as the viewer understand her doubts and fears of losing Aragorn to human mortality. And I just couldn't help but feel sad and sorry for her and pray that she will end up being reunited with Aragorn. Cate Blanchett continues to exude mysterious elegance and sagacious grace as Galadriel. Her mastery of subtlety just made her characterization of this elfin queen function so amazingly and made me as the viewer thoroughly hypnotized at her screen presence. Bernard Hill exuded strength and determination as King Theoden, especially after he's been revived, but also manages to make the old King Theoden a lot more wizened and raspy sounding and a lot more sickly, thus showing that juxtaposition, let alone that metamorphosis of the sickly King Theoden as well as the more healthy and virile and vigorous King Theoden after he has been released from the curse that Saruman puts on him. Brad Dourif was pleasantly sleazy and slimy as Grima Wormtongue, thus making my skin crawl every time he was on screen, and he just made me not only love to hate him because of how much of a usurper he was, but also made me quite intrigued with how much of a bastard he was, thus making Brad Dourif's portrayal of Grima absolutely riveting. Miranda Otto was a noble, elegant, and heroic Éowyn, all thanks to her gorgeous screen presence as well as her mastery of delivering such epic yet graceful lines that made me think that she had a lot of experience with the likes of Shakespeare and a lot of the classical works. She carried herself like a warrior princess about to be queen, and she did so with elegance, elan, and beauty. Karl Urban was a handsome Eomer, thus bringing in a lot of virility, youth, passion, and energy to make this prince work, and do so with greatness beyond compare. Nathaniel Lees as Ugluk was threatening and acerbic, thus using his gravelly voice to make this orc leader a thoroughly intimidating one. I also have to give a lot of props to Craig Parker, John Lee, Bruce Hopkins, and John Bach for their excellent acting prowess to make their respective portrayals of Haldir, Hama, Gumling, and Madrial work so well, not only as confidants, but also as equally strong allies to defeat the orcs. So overall, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers was not only a great sequel in my opinion, but also a great experience that I've witnessed from beginning to end. Sure, some people might complain about it being a little bit more underwhelming than its predecessor, but as for me, I found this sequel to be way more exciting. There's a lot more at stake. There's a lot more tension, action, personal drama, interpersonal drama, and just a whole bunch of great tension and a whole lot of great storytelling to be accomplished with The Two Towers. I was able to feel for nearly all the characters involved. I was able to find myself a lot more engaged with the story, as well as have a great time in terms of how this film used a great deal of balance, whether it's the tension that Frodo has in his internal conflict with the ring, or the war that is about to occur with the magical creatures and humans against the orcs, or even the quieter moments that Pippin and Merry have with Treebeard. Everything about this film worked so well and was so masterful to the point where I consider it to be an all-time great. And you know darn well what I'm going to give The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. A well-deserved rating of 5 out of 5 stars. It is just as excellent as its predecessor, The Fellowship of the Ring. In fact, I highly recommend that you watch these back to back to ensure that you follow the story along, even though watching The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers in one day could prove a bit too strenuous for your eyes. So I would highly recommend to just stick with watching The Fellowship of the Ring one day and The Two Towers the next day, so that at least you could catch up with not only the story, but how well the plot develops. Everything about The Two Towers was excellently paced, as well as extremely well done, not only stylistically, but also in terms of its substance. And for those of you who caught The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, what'd you think of it? Did you really enjoy this film? Did you also consider this to be better than The Fellowship of the Ring? Was there a favorite scene that you particularly loved and remembered to this day? Because I certainly had a good chunk of scenes that I remembered and loved so much. So please let me know in the comments below. Or did you feel like this film was not really that overwhelming? Or did you also feel like this film kind of fell short of the hype that the Lord of the Rings trilogy had? Please let me know in the comments below. Well, that's it for my review of The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Tune in tomorrow for my review of the final Lord of the Rings film, The Return of the King. So until then, good night everybody, and happy Thanksgiving month.